Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today, I share the story of Stephanie Rich. Stephanie is a chef and owner of Verdine in Houston, Texas. In 6 years, she was able to go from a simple vegan pop-up at a farmer's market to owning her own bricks-and-mortar plant-based restaurant called Verdine. Here's Stephanie's transformative story. Today on Plant Your Seed, we have Stephanie Rich, chef and owner of Verdine, an amazing plant-based restaurant in Houston, Texas. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
I really am very excited to have you on the show. I've been to Verdine a couple of months ago, a couple of times actually, and I still remember the orange cauliflower. It is so good.
It's everyone's favorite for sure. I mean, that is probably one of the most talked about dishes, one of the most highly rated dishes we have on the menu, and it's sort of a not to miss. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Now, one of the things that I feel separates you from other plant-based chefs and restaurants is not only are you well trained, getting your culinary training from the Natural Gourmet Institute for Health and Culinary Arts in New York City, but you're also a registered and licensed dietitian, which helps you understand food and health. Now, how does this experience translate into your menu at Verdine?
Right. So I try to put a healthy spin where I can on things. I try to, incorporate something maybe that wouldn't be in the dish. So a lot of our stuff, while we do sort of have classical things that are our inspirations, whether they're pizzas or tacos or burgers, I am using ingredients that are going to be healthy alternatives or that are going to boost sort of the underlying nutrition of it. So I'm always thinking about kind of how I can reach across the aisle, if you will, and get those folks who don't self-identify as necessarily vegan or plant-based or flexitarian or vegetarian, and more try to convince those eaters who, think they hate a certain vegetable or think they just possibly could never skip meat for one meal. Right. And make something that's approachable to them, and kind of disguise a little bit the fact that, you wouldn't know it, but, there's walnuts in our bistro burger patty, anti-inflammatory. There's mushrooms, right? Boost your immunity. We use lentils gram for gram. Those have more protein than ground beef. So all of those things, it's really easy to make something, I guess, nutritious and healthy when all you're using is plants. It just is, right? So it's just making it in a way where, these ingredients are good. How can I get other people to enjoy eating them?
Now, can you tell us a little bit about your plant-based path to where you are today?
Sure. I actually went vegetarian when I was about to be a senior in high school. And it was something I really just did on a whim. I was actually volunteering at a summer camp, and I was working in the kitchen there. And I was seeing a lot of food waste happening. Specifically, the kitchen would overcook, let's say, a sheet tray, which is sheet trays. Think of your cookie tray that you put in your oven, something 4 times that big, filled with chicken breast, that they would overcook for the day. The kids didn't eat it, and then they would throw it away. And around that time, I was starting to get interested in nutritional sciences. I was, in biology too in high school, and I thought the idea was really interesting. You would learn about certain metabolic cycles, and something like a vitamin or fat would be needed for the next stage to occur. And it kind of clicked in my head. Okay, you've been hearing all your life, carrots are good for your eyes, but not knowing why. Mm-hmm. And it's literally something that they contain, this vitamin that makes the next cell process happen. So that, I thought, an idea really intrigued me. So I was kind of getting into health and understanding where our food came from. I was seeing this waste, and something just didn't settle with me. I thought about the fact that somebody had to go through the trouble of buying this chicken, raising this chicken, selling the chicken for slaughter. Someone then had to slaughter the chicken, package the chicken. It had to get shipped to the store. Someone else had to buy it. Someone else had to spend all the hours in the kitchen cooking it. And now it's in the trash. So that chicken's life was like for nothing.
Right.
And all that cost and all that labor and exchange of, services and people, it just felt wasteful. And so it just didn't sit right with me. And I kind of was like, you know what, I kind of want to take a step back from this. And I went vegetarian. I was like, just declared, I'm going to go vegetarian for a week. And the week was sort of up. Again, I'm at this summer camp. I don't know what I would have ate because this is in South Texas, very quote unquote normal mainstream, standard American diet food was being served. So honestly, looking back on it, I do not know what I possibly could have eaten because everything meat in it or whatever. So I feel like it was like cereal and candy. I don't know. But I was 17. I was 16 or 17, so it didn't matter. So the week came up and my friend was like, hey, you can start eating, meat again. And I sort of was like, I'm just going to keep doing this until I don't feel like it. So fast forward, I'm now in my early 30s and I'm vegan. And from that point to here, it was really self-education. So when I came home, my parents were like, you're vegetarian, you're doing what now? What are we supposed to feed you? Mm-hmm. So I kind of went pescatarian a little bit for them to make it easier on, them packing lunches so I could have tuna salad and stuff and just sort of, transitioning a little slower, I guess, and as I figured this thing out. But I started learning about nutrition. I started getting interested in my food because I was, trying to make some of these things I liked eating now vegetarian. Mm-hmm. And so that went on for a little bit. And then when I was transitioning, when I was 20 and I was, about a sophomore in college, this going vegan was sort of like on my mind. And that was back in, I want to say 2011 or 12. And honestly, people did not know the word vegan unless you were a vegetarian.
Right.
And so you just knew about this like subset of like, crazy people that were vegan and that like, you can't eat eggs. And I just didn't understand why. And I didn't understand why that was a big deal or why cheese was a big deal. But it kept on coming back up to me like, you should look into this, you should do this, you should look into this. And so finally I was like, you know what, screw it. I did vegetarian for 1 week just to see how it goes. I'm just going to go vegan for 1 week just to see how it goes. And like, for me, what was holding me back was cheese. I thought, no way, I could never give it up. I couldn't live without it. And I feel like the first 3 days I was like detoxing from it. Like I had like the shakes and I just like, I couldn't look at like a box of Cheez-Its. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to crack. Like I'll eat that, And then it sort of passes. And now especially like now it's night and day. When I first went vegan, the number of products that were on the market were minimal. Right. And then from those minimal products, the number that were actually good and tasty were like an even smaller group. Now it's like, you don't have an excuse not to try vegan at least for a few days or a week. It's so easy with all the products, but your taste buds change, and I, again, was, in college studying to be a dietitian. I graduated early. I knew I wanted to learn about food and cook. I didn't want to go to a traditional culinary school because I wasn't really willing to butcher a pig, and I really didn't want to learn how to cook everything in butter. Like, that didn't sound interesting to me. I was like, That's not how I live. That's not what I want to do. Why do I want to learn this? So I was very lucky to find the Natural Gourmet at that time. They have since closed a few years ago, the school, but it was a fabulous school, started in like the 70s. By a health pioneer, Anne Marie Colvin, all about doing natural foods, whole foods, plant-based, and everything. So I did that culinary training, and that's sort of when the two things clicked for me. Again, I knew the science of it. I knew why vegetables were healthy. I really am passionate about it and believe in why a plant-based diet is the healthy way to go. And now I had the tools to sort of show people how to do it themselves, and help them execute it themselves and make it, hopefully a little bit more accessible.
You said you struggled with cheese. How did you overcome that struggle? Was it just willpower, or did you just find?
It was mostly willpower. And I would say, again, I was in my 20s, so probably once a year I would probably sneak a tiny piece of something, maybe. I don't, quite remember, but mostly it was willpower, especially that like first week when I was like, I feel like I was, trying to get off of my drug, if you will. There has been studies that show that like cheese acts like a drug, essentially, in our body. And so that first, like those first couple of days, like I really felt that. And now it's sort of like a non-issue because you do sort of forget what it tastes like. And I don't mean that to sound like sad, because I know some people will interpret that as like, I don't ever want to forget what it tastes like. It tastes good. Right. But there's so many other things that taste good. They might not taste exactly like it, but they're good in their own right. You know, they're just as tasty in their own right. And I know there's not these like negative things associated with them, whether it's, you know, the dairy industry or whether it's cholesterol, you know, whichever way you want, you know, the environmental impact, whichever way you want to look at it, right? It is more beneficial not to have the animal source of the cheese or the cream or whatever it might be. So knowing that helps. It's just more in line with my views and sort of how, you know, I'm choosing to live this life and how I want, where I want to put my energy and what matters to me. So I think if you have that sort of mindset, it's not hard. The other thing I kind of always say or equate it to for people, it's like, think about a food like you don't like to eat. Like, for instance, some people don't like to eat salmon, right? It's not hard for them not to eat salmon. They just don't do it. Right. They don't think about it. I've been eating this way for, again, 10 plus years. It's second nature to me. So it's not hard for me to like circumvent it right now. Yes, at the beginning it definitely was. Yes, when I was, you know, when I was a vegetarian, my whole diet almost felt like it was cheese. I was more of like a cheesetarian, I think, than like a vegetarian. But again, I was in college. I was 18, 19, 20 years old in South Texas, where a vegetarian, that was the only vegetarian option, cheese. They weren't cooking vegetables, you know? Right. So there was a little bit of that. But you just sort of, I don't know, for me, I kind of grew out of it, learned from it, and kind of moved on with my life. I don't know.
What do you use to kind of substitute, or what are some of the substitutes that you have used now that you didn't use before? You know, for me, it's seitan, lentils. What are some of the things that you find substitute best for you?
That's so funny. I feel like everything I use now, I like wouldn't have used if I, you know, didn't go to culinary school, if this wasn't sort of like the path my life took me on. Anything from, you know, mellow white miso, I use that all the time in my cooking nutritionally. No, those aren't substitutes, but I definitely wouldn't be using those things on a regular basis the way I do now had I not sort of gone down this path. But we eat a lot of tofu in my house. My husband is not a vegan, but he enjoys my cooking, which is always vegan for him. And he does enjoy tofu, you know, as long as I make it crispy, as long as it's super flavorful. So tofu, I guess, would be one of them. We eat that a lot. Tempeh, I use a lot at my restaurant. We get a great local, unpasteurized, you know, non-GMO organic tempeh. That's made in Austin, Texas. That gets frozen, FedExed overnight to us in Houston from the Flying Tempeh Brothers. But so that's another product if you're thinking about substitutions, right? That I use a lot. So those are my two main, you know, and then stuff that, of course, I'm using now that I wouldn't have used 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Beyond Meat didn't exist then. Just Egg didn't exist then. Follow Your Heart, Violife, all of these convenience brands. I don't base my diet around those, but I definitely do mix them in. You know, I'm like everybody. You have a long day. You don't feel like cooking. Excuse me. You know, sometimes those things just taste good, you know, again, in their own right. So those would be other, you know, things that I rely on too in terms of like replacing or substituting, if you will. But I do think it's important to mention that rethinking your plate is really important. That was something that I stumbled on and kind of struggled with when I first went vegetarian and vegan, you know, still thinking about the plate as a protein with 2 vegetable sides, right? And so if you kind of only look at it like that, you get stuck with, okay, so I'm just supposed to put a slab of tofu on my dinner plate every single night, you know? So kind of reworking, you know, what, you know, a full balanced meal can look like. And I always try to take in consideration what I'm eating throughout the whole day, right? So if I, made myself, super healthy green smoothie in the morning, and I know that had, my protein butter had 20 grams of protein in it, plus I'm adding like an almond milk, and I'm adding spinach, which is high in protein, and I'd had some snacks throughout the day, hummus and other things that I know are good protein sources. If my dinner is really just like a gluten-free pasta with, lots of veggies in it, I'm not going to be so worried. I know I already met my needs, right? So
right.
I think kind of looking at it also very holistically too helps.
I just absolutely love your story. I mean, it really shows what someone can do that has a passion and drive to accomplish your goals. How did you get the courage to quit everything and just basically create your restaurant, take everything to the next level? How did you just get the courage to quit everything and do it?
Yeah, I don't know how I did it. Actually, sometimes I joke with people, I'm like, looking back, I don't know how I survived those food truck years.
I look back at this and I'm like, to me, it's like a quick 6-year plan that you go from a pop-up market at a farmer's market to you quit your day job, you get a food truck, you open your restaurant. I mean, it's amazing.
Right. I mean, it didn't, and let me tell you, it felt like 10 or 12 years for sure. It did not feel fast every day. Was it the days are short, but the years are long? But for the restaurant, it was several years in the making of really hard work and just determination. That's really, I think, a lot of it was determination. I am originally from Houston, Texas, but I did get my undergraduate from NYU. And so when I moved back home after I, graduated, went to culinary school, I wanted to complete my sort of training, which is having a dietetic internship in order to become a registered dietitian, right? My undergraduate's in nutrition, in which, you can do things with, but sort of like you're kind of 80% there, right? People, if you want to work in the nutrition field, which at the time was something I thought I wanted to do, you really need those couple letters at the end of your name, right? Mm-hmm. Which is RD, registered dietitian. So anyways, you apply to programs and they're matched, just similar to, a residency, but obviously I'm not comparing myself to a doctor or anything, but you just match a program. Anyways, I got matched to Houston. So I moved back, and Houston is a vibrant restaurant city, right? It's the fourth largest city in the U.S., but there were no vegan options at the time. There was one restaurant, there was one bakery, but that was like it. And I had come back from New York City. I had come back from this culinary program that all I did was live, breathe, eat, see, think vegan food. And I knew what I was getting myself back into moving back to Texas, but it was also just more jarring a little bit because I was in a little bit of disbelief. I was like, there's no way we're this behind the times. Like, come on, like this is the next big wave. I just felt like this was the next big thing in food. LA was doing it, New York was doing it. It just made sense, we should be vegan. And so I moved back in 2010. By 2013, I started the farmer's market. But before that, I was just writing a food blog. So I missed cooking every day in culinary school. And now I was in my dietetic internship, so I was working in a hospital all day, which was not an environment that I like personally. It's not something that I wanted to do, which again, this is why I'm not working as a dietitian in the hospital today. Right. So I just, was like, you know what, I'm going to start a cooking blog. So I started making recipes and putting them on there, but you don't have I didn't feel like I had a good knack for it. And I also felt like I didn't really know if people were making the recipes. I also, right after I graduated from my master's program in being a dietitian, I worked for a prepared food store called Snap Kitchen as their registered dietitian in Houston, making meal plans for people using the prepared foods made by that company. And one of the things I kept hearing from people was like, they just didn't have the time, or they didn't know how, or they knew how, but they didn't want to do the cleanup. It was sort of like I knew Snap Kitchen was successful because they were making the food for people. Mm-hmm. So I just saw that people weren't going to eat healthy unless someone else did it for them.
Right. Yeah.
And then I'm looking at my, website going, I know I have all these good recipes. I know I make good food, but who's even cooking these recipes? Is it really even happening? Like, I'm not making as big of an impact because I'm sharing these recipes in order to hopefully make people want to eat plant-based, incorporate more plant-based, more vegan to their diet, but I don't really know if that's getting to them. I'm seeing from people firsthand that if I don't do it for them, it's not happening. And then the third component was there was nothing in the market. And I just felt like I watched for 3 years, nothing open in Houston. I was like, surely some, larger chain is going to come in. Surely some concept is going to pop up that will be vegan, that will be healthy, that will be even flexitarian, And finally, of course, we got things like local food started adding more vegan stuff on their menu. We finally got our True Food Kitchen in Houston. But still, that was, again, years after I started my farmer's market pop-up stand. Right. So I finally said, screw it. I think I can do this.
Nice.
So I was just like, let me give this a go. I just felt like, I don't know, I just felt like I could do it. So
but like what gets you to that point? As far as like the courage to just be like, you know what, I have this safe job. It's comfortable. It might not be exactly what I want, but at the same time, I really like doing this. I'm just going to quit the day job and I'm just going to go for it.
Well, I quit slowly. I quit eventually. So I was actually running my company on the side for about 6 or 8 months. I forget exactly the timeline. So I was working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday as a dietitian. And then I would, run my farmer's market business sort of at night, but it was super small. So I didn't have to do too much like throughout the week, but it was mostly on the weekends. Mm-hmm. So I still had my job. I was still, I didn't just quit out of the blue with no backup, right? Like I dipped my toe in, saw, is this something I want to do, tested the market before I really said, okay, now I'm responsible for my own income, right? So, I was renting a kitchen on Sunday morning, so I'd wake up at like 4 a.m, go to the kitchen, cook I sold like 50 to 60 meals every Sunday, which was like, it's small. But I got to the point where people were pre-ordering them and I would almost have half of my meals accounted for before I even showed up for the market that day. But I could only make that much, I would wake up at 4 a.m, go to the kitchen at 5, cook. Again, I don't know how I did this. Looking back, it's like, okay, you were young. That's the only thing I can you
were driven though.
I was determined. I just saw this, I saw this need and I was sort of like, I don't know, this has to happen. I don't know why this isn't happening. This should be a thing. This should exist. I want people to have this. I honestly wanted people to have the food that I was looking for in Houston that I could not get myself. And I just felt like I couldn't be the only one looking for this,
Now, I was down in Houston and there was nothing. There was nothing down there back then. And you're right. It was very limited.
And so I was just like, again, to my core, I just felt like this thing needed to exist. I felt like I had the background, knowledge, training, et cetera, enough to somewhat pull it off. I didn't know to what degree I would be able to pull it off. But enough to go, hey, I'm going to give this a try and see, if I'm right. And it just grew. It really grew organically through time and literal blood, sweat, and tears. From, again, putting in those really early hours on Sundays before I quit my, normal 9 to 5, then I quit it. And then I was doing 2 or 3 farmers markets a week. And then finding that that's where I was tapping myself out. I could only do so much by myself. I wasn't making enough money to hire anybody for help, so you get caught in that limbo. So, okay, I need to make my business bigger. How do I make my business bigger? What's the next step? Food truck. That seems a lot less scary than a restaurant. And who's coming to my restaurant? Nobody knows who I am. Yeah, the 100 people that I serve at the farmers market Wednesday, downtown know who I am, but I need 200 to 300 people to come to my restaurant every day in order for the numbers to make sense. I don't know if I can't guarantee that's going to happen, right? So let me start with the food truck. That was a whole thing, getting that up and running, going. Food truck business is brutal. Again, I look back on that and go, I don't know how I did 16, 18-hour days sometimes. Again, not every day, but enough. Working 6 days a week. All the things that go into it. I think I was young, dumb, and stupid and hungry, mm-hmm. And at that point too, you are now responsible for your paycheck. So everything you do is literally rides on you. The whole thing rides on you. So like, in order for it to be successful, I started putting my name out there. I wanted to look good. I didn't want to look like a failure. So you try hard. And I've always been like that. I've always been very, I've been pretty, good at school. I kind of know how to play that, like, study, do the work, get the A next. Like, I'm more of a type A type of personality. And just for me, how I'm wired, like, what scared me more than like doing the thing was not doing the thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm always scared to not do the thing more than I am to do it, because I just don't want to like have this thing that is in the back of my mind, like, what if? I'm very, I'm more of a classic, like, overachiever type personality, where like I'm doing 20 things and I still don't think I'm doing enough, Mm-hmm. So that's just me. That's how I'm wired. There's nothing, which is advantageous at sometimes, and other times it's, not the best. And you risk burnout, which I've had a few times, and just not caring for myself properly, working until I physically crash, right?
Can you give me an example of that? Like, when did you do that?
A million times over and over. I'm slowly starting to be better about that, because I'm not so much like the day-to-day, every single aspect of the job is not dependent on me. I've been able to let go, and I've been able to sort of, divide up my work a little more balancedly, which is great. But just like simple things, like, I would go almost all day without eating, because I didn't want to stop and take a break, because this needed to get done, this needed to get done, right? Mm-hmm. Just kind of an internal, just pushing myself to go. Taking on too much, just stretching yourself kind of too thin, right? So those sort of kind of behaviors was really how I lived in my mid-20s.
Now, did you ever feel like giving up? Like you weren't going to make it?
All the time. You just felt like, what is this all for? Not seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. I looked for a restaurant space for about a year. I had to convince people to give me money to open this thing. I don't have money just lying around to open a restaurant. You
Right.
either have to go to a bank or you have to get investors. So figuring out how to do that. So it took me, I started really in 2016. I opened the food truck. I opened the farmer's market stand May 2013. I opened the food truck September 2014. And then, I opened the restaurant March 2019. But 2016, so I started the food truck 2016, I was already like, I got to open a restaurant. People were asking me, I couldn't meet the demand. I was seeing I was already, butting my head up against the wall and the limitations of what a food truck can do. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great things about a food truck: lower overhead, lower startup. But if it's raining, you can't operate.
Right.
You just that, and if that's one, you have you have 6 chances. You've got 10 chances. Sometimes I would do doubles, I call them, where I would go out for lunch and then I would go out for dinner. So sometimes I would do actually 30 plus services in 30 days.
Wow.
So that means I'm not out every day, but I would do doubles maybe twice a week or something, right? So maybe I would do 7 services in 4 days or whatever, that doesn't make sense, but 7 services in 5 days or something, right? Mm-hmm. Like that. And that wasn't all the time, but those were in my money-making, spring and fall, when the weather was good in Houston, when there was festivals to attend, when people were booking food trucks to come to their parties, to come to their apartment buildings, right? So I always just was double downing. Like, when it was good, you just had to let it be good, because there was times in August where you're in the middle of, a parking lot, and like 3 people have come to see you because the heat index is 110 and the humidity is 100, and nobody's going outside to eat at your food truck. It doesn't matter how good your food is, right? Right. So you I was seeing those problems with it. And again, I just felt ready. I knew I had proven myself in terms of like the market. People were liking my food truck. It was a success. Like, I was making money. It was a success in kind of all the parameters you could look at it. But it took me a year to find the restaurant space. It took me 2 realtors to get to the right realtor who was willing to help me, find a space. It took, how many no's to get as few yeses I need to get the money with investors to raise the capital to open. The build out took about 3 months longer than it should have. So that's what I'm saying. For me, that whole timeline felt so long, and there was, again, so many points where you'd get to a dead end, or you'd get frustrated, and it was sort of like, I'm killing myself to do this. I'm working myself to the bone. I live, breathe, eat this. Like, I had no work-life balance. Like, there was no separation. Like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't have to do this. You know what I mean? But I would get over that. You would get mad and frustrated or tired, and then you would rest and you would come back, and I would just know, but actually I do need to do this. I don't know. There was just something in me that just felt this deep urge, like this thing had to be created. Like, I knew I was supposed to open this restaurant. Like, I knew this thing needed to exist. And so I was just kind of bound by that a little bit to just keep going. But yes, I wanted to give up all the time.
Were you always taken seriously? I mean...
No. I mean, even before I opened the food truck, people told me, your food truck will not be successful if you don't sell meat. You have to sell it at least a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. Almost have that True Foods concept where it's just all blanket, and then you choose your protein if you want it vegetarian, if you want it, with a piece of steak, whatever. So yeah, nobody thought the food truck would be successful being vegan. Nobody. Also, it's really funny when a 25-year-old girl pulls up to a food truck lot with 5 other food trucks, and 3 of them are barbecue, one's burgers, one's Tex-Mex, and they're all owned and operated by men in their 40s and 50s. And I'm pulling up in my little truck. Hi guys, cute little young girl. I'm just selling some broccoli over here. Don't mind me. I mean, the looks I would get, right? But eventually those guys all liked me because I was just this non-threatening competitor. Their customers were never going to be my customers, and my customers were never going to be their customers, Right. So, I could hear the gossip between some of them because they would all talk to me instead of each other sometimes. So it was funny. But the food truck community is nice as a whole, but you definitely, I know those guys were giving me looks like, what is this little girl doing? What is she thinking? Uh-huh. So yeah, people in that way for sure, didn't really think the vegan thing would work. And we're like, who are you? With the restaurant, because I had a brand built, because I had a following built, because I had, a track record, I was taken a lot more seriously. And again, 2017, 2018, veganism, you knew that word. That was more of a mainstream word, right? People, saw that on the rise. 2011, 2013, people still didn't know what that was. So there was a difference there.
Your original concept was, what was it called, Ripe?
Right. The food truck was called, I started with, again, the blog was called Ripe Cuisine, and then I did a pop-up market. It was called Ripe Cuisine, and then, so the food truck, of course, was named that as well. But when we opened the restaurant, I decided to change our name. So Verdine came about from one, trying to get creative and figure out a new name. Mm-hmm. And part of it came from sort of creating a word that I knew I could copyright that didn't exist. So the ver from it came from this thought that I had that verde and vert, meaning green, right, in both French and Spanish, and then veritas and veridad, meaning truth in Latin and Spanish, both had those ver, prefixes on the word, which I thought was interesting. I was like, oh, wow, green and truth, ver. That's interesting. And so that idea was rolling around in my head for a while. And then we just sort of completed the word with dine, right? Dining, truth. So it's sort of like truthful green dining, is sort of the behind the meaning of the name. And then, of course, I thought of the word and I thought it was perfect. And then I Googled it only to find out that Verdine White is a member of Earth, Wind, and
Exactly.
Fire. So it wasn't really this amazing
He's a bass player.
new word that I thought I made up. But I was like, whatever, I'm going with it. No one's going to name their restaurant that. So,
It's a tribute to him.
Yeah, it's funny.
No, I happened to see that as well. I thought that was kind of funny when I was kind of researching it. I love that name. It's such a great name. It's a made up word. So
right, except not. But yeah, it's funny. But I loved Ripe, and that brand and that concept, that logo. I mean, nothing changed. It literally, I just went to the court and I got a name change, right? And that was when I was doing that transition. I was trying to make that apparent to my customers, and it was funny because we ran the food truck for about a year after I announced the name of the restaurant was going to be Verdine, and so we rebranded the look of the truck. I mean, we would have people come up to the food truck. Have you seen? There's like another vegan truck that has like a big tomato on it, because that was part of the logo for Ripe Cuisine had a tomato on it. And so the one side of the food truck was just, huge cartoon kind of tomato. And we're like, yeah, that's us. Like, that's this truck. We had a sign on the front, now Verdine, formerly called Ripe Cuisine. But people don't read signs. But so it was a learning curve for people to kind of readjust. But it was just due again to just opening the restaurant and wanting a different look in terms of branding for the restaurant than what I currently had with Ripe Cuisine. And again, being able to copyright it was a big concern of mine. So
now your mantra at Verdine is eat with a purpose. Can you explain what that means and how it pertains to sustainability as well as health?
Yeah, absolutely. So purposeful eating, right? Whether that's intuitive eating, just giving your food some thought. And like I said at the beginning, like that's how this whole thing started for me, right? I started thinking about where my food came from. I started thinking about why we eat what we eat. What is defined as good for you? What food, does your body really need to be optimal, right? So purposeful eating. So eating with a purpose, eating at Verdine means you're purposely eating plants because they're good for you, they're good for the planet, they're good for animals, right? So it's putting that intention behind your eating, not just sort of, eating whatever. It's kind of having that intention to it.
What are you trying to achieve with your restaurant? Why is focusing on plant-based diet important?
Well, again, it's just something for me that I personally believe in, and I truly am passionate about, a plant-based diet being good for your health, being good for the health of the planet, and then, of course, the welfare of the animals. For me, it's like there's like memes out there like, why are you vegan? And it's like Will Smith like holding up his hands pointing to like every reason in the book you could possibly be vegan.
Right.
And I really feel that. So it's about putting this like thing out there that I think should exist. Like there's no reason, and a part of how I have shaped, even with the food truck with Ripe Cuisine, the part of how I shaped it, I really wanted it to be approachable to non-vegans, to people who didn't self-identify as, plant-based or, again, vegetarian, flexitarian, whatever, right? I wanted people to say, I don't eat plants, I eat meat. I could have never imagined myself ever not skipping a meal with meat in it, but like, holy cow, I loved your food. I'll be back. My favorite compliment, if you cooked for me every day, I'd go vegan, right? Which just shows me that like, okay, like it's possible for everybody. Everybody could do it. Again, if they wanted to, it is inconvenient to do. It's not hard to do. It's inconvenient. So you have to step a little bit around sort of the circle. The world is not set up to be vegan or plant-based. So you have to go a little bit out of your way. But if you care to do that, it's totally possible and doable. You just got to care that 10% extra to walk around, the door that's closed and go on the other side of it, right? And figure it out. But it's possible and doable. So I really always wanted to set up, the restaurant and my brand to be approachable to everybody, right? Again, so making things that people recognize, making the foods that they like, but then modifying them with the healthier ingredients. And again, it's sort of easy. Modifying it with a healthy ingredient, I'm just going to add some vegetables to it. Guess what? Now it's healthy. It's got all the vegetables in it. You normally don't eat vegetables. You're eating, all this fiber that you normally don't eat. Even if that's the only thing you do, if that's the only thing we look at in terms of what a vegetable can bring to the table, fiber is huge. So many people suffer from colon cancer, right? From poor digestion, from obesity, from insulin resistance. Fiber, heart disease. Fiber helps with all of those. So if we only just look at vegetables on that one thing, if I get someone to eat one meal that's more fiber rich, it's more vegetable rich than normal, we're already helping them. It's small, it's a baby step, but it's a step. It's something, right? And then, of course, again, for those people that are vegan or vegetarian, not want to indulge with our orange cauliflower, they've got every right. They've got every right to indulge with orange cauliflower. They're not eating bacon and soft cheeses and pastrami or whatever else. So they can indulge once in a while with some fried cauliflower, which, again, not the healthiest thing on the menu. Never would say it is, but it's delicious, and we all deserve a little bit of that kind of stuff.
I agree.
So again, it's sort of striking that balance. I think that answered your question, but I know part of your question was, where do you see the restaurant or kind of the goals for it? Right now, that's a little unclear. Again, unfortunately, with this whole pandemic going around, we're just trying to stay open and figure out what reopening is going to look like for us, truthfully. So whatever my big plans were for the restaurant right now are a little on hold, just to while we, kind of figure out what's going on and what the landscape of dining out is going to look like in the next couple months and the next coming year.
With the whole COVID-19, that's got to be a very challenging situation for you.
Yeah. So we were doing great. We were really hitting our stride. January, February, December were really good months for us from a business standpoint. And we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. So the restaurant, turned one during, COVID-19. The end of March, beginning of April is our anniversary. So we hit the 1-year mark, which is amazing. And it went by so fast. And that's a huge, huge accomplishment for any restaurant just to be open for a year. Mm-hmm. So that's awesome. So now, it's, we've been able to keep about half of my staff employed, meaning giving them hours, albeit they are somewhat of a reduction in hours, but they're hours, right? And that's really our kitchen staff. We've been able to, for the most of our kitchen staff, been able to fully employ. We don't need as many people because we're not selling as much food, because we're not open as many hours as well, and because people aren't coming to us at the rates at which they were coming to us before all this. But we've been able to keep some people, which is great. We've been able to stay open, feeding our customers this type of food that we know is very valuable to them, for multiple reasons: normalcy, health, convenience. And in doing so, obviously getting payment for those foods and collecting tips, and then being able to use those tips collected and pay all of our furloughed employees, like our front of house staff, our waiters. I can't, there's no use for a waiter. I can't have someone who's a waiter at my restaurant. It doesn't exist. That job doesn't exist anymore right now. But we have been pretty lucky, and we've been able to pay everybody at least 50% of their paycheck on the average the past couple, since this whole thing started. We've had like 3 pay periods since then. So we haven't closed fully. We're still paying our employees. We're still open. So by that, we're doing great in terms of success, kind of riding this storm. But we as a company, as a restaurant, are not doing as well. We still have rent due. We still have kitchen equipment leases due. We still have insurance due. We still have to pay, taxes, all that kind of stuff, unemployment tax. So it has been sort of a balance. And we're just trying to get everybody to eat at Verdine as much as they can to help us out with all of those things. Yeah,
I can't even imagine having a restaurant in this environment. It must be extremely difficult.
It's just, there's a lot of unknowns right now. So we're hanging in there, and once some of that stuff gets settled, once, the dine-in restrictions are lifted, once we sort of know what that landscape looks like, adapting. But we've had to adapt. Every restaurant has had to adapt. Every business, whatever business, small business you have, you are adapting. You are doing something now that you didn't have to do before. You're changing your products. You're offering new services. You're offering a different way to get those services. So we've done a mix of you're offering discounts. We've done a mix of all of those things, because you've got to kind of sort of think outside the box and adapt to sort of the new environment and culture around you.
Now, finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
I don't know what my word would be for before. Maybe my word for before was 17. I have no, I was just in high school. It was just normal, again, and eating the normal, like, standard American diet. My family is not vegan, or particularly health food. My mom sort of has transitioned to almost a fully vegan diet at this point, but I didn't grow up vegan. A lot of people, for some reason, think I did. I definitely did not. So I don't know, 17 maybe. And then I guess for after now is, I don't want to say great. That just sounds so like, I don't know, doesn't sound, I don't have a good word, but I mean, I feel like me. I feel right. I feel settled. I feel, these aren't really sexy adjectives. I know. Sorry about that, but I don't know. I feel good. I feel great. I feel normal. I feel healthy. I feel kind of all of those things. I don't know what's a better word to encompass all of those feelings into one, but
right, more in line with your goals and your easy. Ideals.
I mean, I don't feel weird. I feel easy. I just feel like, yep, it works for me. You know what I mean? It works for me. And I thrive on a higher carbohydrate, so to speak, diet. It works for me. I don't know.
That's great. It's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much for taking the time. Can you just remind everybody where they can find you on Instagram, the web, and obviously at Verdine?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is eatverdine.com. We are on Instagram as Eat Verdine as well. And then my personal Instagram is at Chef Stephanie Rich. We are in Houston, Texas in the Heights at 449 West 19th Street. We are still open with takeout and delivery options available, and you can actually now, as of yesterday, order online from us for curbside delivery. So that's a new, again, feature we've added due to all the craziness that's going on in the world right now. So we are available. We've got an all-day menu, 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday, and then we also serve brunch on Sundays, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Sundays is our all-day menu with a few brunch specials added. We, like I said, 100% vegan, and mostly all of our menu items as well happen to be gluten-free. And our desserts, whether it's our baked donuts or a slice of cake or cookies, are always both vegan and gluten-free too. So we've got beer, we've got wine, we've got starters, salads, we've got it all. We're an all-day cafe. So we would be happy to feed you during this time.
All right, great. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Fred.
Hope you are inspired by this story, and remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review, and until next time, thank you for listening.